Hello friends, let's rank my 10 favorite completed fantasy series of all time. Hi guys, welcome back, bienvenue and all that jazz. It's time to talk about some books. Or in particular, today I'll be talking about my 10 favorite completed fantasy series of all time. These are fantasy series that are not only completed, like as in the authors have released all the books, but as in I have also finished reading all of the books. So some favorites like Anita Blake or Song of Ice and Fire, things where the series aren't complete yet, are not going to be on this list. I'll make a separate list for favorite ongoing series, but today is just completed series. So for those of you out there who want to know that a series is complete before you dip a toe in there and see if you like it, because maybe you want to binge it, maybe you want to just have the comfort knowing that at some point in the future, when you may or may not wish to put it into your TBR, that it is already complete. So starting off in 10th place, we have the Kane Chronicles by Mr. Rick Riordan. This is his Egyptian series. It is just a trilogy. So if you are somebody out there who is either obsessed with Egyptian mythology like myself, or you love a middle grade and you're just looking for a fun trilogy to get into, I can't recommend the Kane Chronicles highly enough. In the Kane Chronicles, we follow the siblings Carter and Sadie Kane, and their father, who is this Egyptologist, goes missing, and so they end up going to stay with their uncle and finding out about family secrets and the state of the Egyptian gods in the modern landscape, and a dark threat from Egyptian mythology rises towards the end of this first book, and he kind of carries across the other two remaining books. So if you like cool hieroglyphic-based magic, Egyptian mythology, gods, goddesses, all of that kind of stuff, you like sibling relationships, you like just fast-paced, fun, action, adventure, fantasy, you're welcome. Then the next one, I toyed with whether or not I wanted to even include it on this list because the author is surrounded in mucho controversy. So I am of the generation that I was kind of growing up while these books were coming out. They were a very formative part of me becoming the reader that I am today. And it was just an experience growing up with these books. And so of course I'm talking about Harry Potter. I totally acknowledge that J.K. Rowling is a piece of garbage human being. We do not stand her or anything about her on this channel. However, she's one of those authors that I feel like has reached such a level of success that me just refusing to talk about her on my channel doesn't affect her in any way. I feel like I go about showing my support for the trans community in my day-to-day life and with the people that I choose to include in my life and the things that I choose to do and all of that kind of stuff. And so for me personally, I still own my collection of Harry Potter books, and I hope to reread them even someday and hopefully manage to keep the art separate from the artist. But if you have chosen to boycott everything J.K. Rowling, I totally understand. But the Harry Potter series will forever be near and dear to my heart. I remember going to the midnight book releases, the midnight movie showings. My husband and I even went on a date to go to the final midnight release of the 8th Harry Potter movie. And so these books just sparked a love in me for magical schools and for having those series that kind of age up with readers, because especially these first books of Harry Potter, the Sorcerer's Stone and the Chamber of Secrets, they feel much more middle grade, and they definitely aged up and got much darker in themes and stuff like that as their readers aged up too. And so that was my first time experiencing a series like this. It was obviously like a worldwide phenomenon, and so these books still hold a very special place in my heart, but they have gotten knocked down quite low in my top 10 just because we don't stand Twitter hate. No, we don't. Then in 8th place is the only series on this list that I don't own, and that would be the Winternight Trilogy by Katherine Arden. So I read this earlier this year. If you don't know, the Winternight Trilogy, starting with book 1, The Bear and the Nightingale, is historical fantasy. It is very much set in a real time with references to real people and real events in Russian history, and it delves really deeply into this kind of Russian folklore. And one, I think I loved the series particularly because I'm not super familiar with Russian folklore, so some of the creatures and stuff like that were familiar but unique enough that I was really excited about it. And The Bear and the Nightingale in particular feels like this like adult fantastical fairy tale, and it also has these kind of creepy horror elements with maybe zombies. So we follow our main character Vasya, or Vasilisa Petrovna, I want to say is her name, and she is growing up in this village, And this series definitely examines the influx of Christianity as a faith and how it affected the kind of more native religions that were present at the time and kind of suppressed them, and views on women and how it was okay to be a woman at that time. And it has these really interesting themes, but it's really layered in this beautiful adult-like fairy tale feeling story where it never feels like heavy-handed with these moral lessons and themes. You can definitely kind of just enjoy the story for what it is, or you can kind of peel apart those different layers. And I think I particularly enjoyed reading this because I think it was for books 2 and 3. I read them right after I joined BookTube, and so I met some BookTube friends. That's how I met Evie from She Was Only Evie, and we were doing this read along, and there was an actual Russian guy in the Discord with us, kind of giving us little ins and outs of this is real, this is not real. So just like, it was a really fun experience. It was my first experience of ever doing any kind of buddy reading read along type situation. It was like my first time participating in one that somebody else was hosting, and so that was just a very unique experience. And so I think that has really cemented that trilogy in my heart, in my feels, and it's just great. So if you want like adult fairy tales, read it. Then in 7th place is a series that I recently completed. I want to say I completed it last month maybe. Or maybe it was, I don't know. What month is it? What is time? But that would be The Legends of the First Empire series by Mr. Michael J. Sullivan. I got introduced to the series by my friend Jashana, and she has been screaming about it for ages. And I got sucked in, not gonna lie. It is a fantastic series. If you like classic fantasy, but you want those more modern spins on having the story be a little bit more emotional, if you want those like more modern type tales where not everybody is going to survive and it's really going to punch you in the feels, but it also has all the classic fantasy tropes that you're kind of familiar with and classic fantasy races with a slight spin, then look no further than The Legends of the First Empire. It will give you all of that and more. But basically, what's happening in The Legends of the First Empire in the first book is the humans are kept in this almost like prehistoric, like Stone Age type state by these elven-like beings known as the Frey. And the Frey have kind of placed themselves in this position because they have got the humans believing that they are basically these immortal godlike beings. But in the very beginning of the first book, Age of Myth, we see that that's not true, as a human kills a Frey and kind of sparks a rebellion / rising up / war with the Frey. And so we kind of follow what happens, and we get different perspectives from the Frey, from the humans, and all of it. This series has dragons, cool magic, it has animal companions, it has all of the like heartbreaking twists and turns and gut punches that you didn't see coming, and a fun, just like classic fantasy adventure type story. So if that's your vibe, what are you waiting for? Then in 6th place, we have the Elminster series. This is by Ed Greenwood. So speaking of classic fantasy, this tells the tale of Elminster Almar, who comes to be known as the Chosen of Mystra. So if you don't know anything, the Elminster series is set in the Forgotten Realms, which most people, when they think Forgotten Realms, they think of specifically the Drizzt series, but the Forgotten Realms is much more complex than that. It is basically this Dungeons and Dragons campaign setting that was expanded upon in hundreds of novels by many, many different authors. And so while the series do follow this kind of chronological in-world timeline, all of the various series within the Forgotten Realms do not necessarily intersect with characters or anything like that. Elminster is one of those characters that you are likely to see pop up in other series because he is just one of the most famous characters in this world, and Ed Greenwood is actually the creator of the Forgotten Realms setting. So if you want to check out the Forgotten Realms, you don't know where to start, you don't want to start in any of the other places, because I made a whole video about where to start on the Forgotten Realms, and this was one of them. But this story sticks in my mind so prominently because it was the first time that I really got to grow with a character. So in the first book, Elminster, The Making of a Mage, we meet Elminster as a young boy when he is kind of a shepherd and his village gets destroyed by a dragon rider, and we get to follow him on his quest for revenge. And eventually, by the end of the Elminster series, you're following this all-powerful uber archmage who's chosen of the goddess of magic, who's known as Mystra. So if you want a awesome fantasy tale where you get to start with that kind of coming of age story and then progress into the wild levels of power that happen. And then there are different events that happen at large in the Forgotten Realms, such as the Time of Troubles, which I'll circle back to with a different series that I have to talk about. If you ever hit one of those, you may just want to Google, like, what is the Time of Troubles before really diving into one of the books. But you could also just dive in blind, and I don't think that there would be anything that you couldn't get your mind around. It's not, like, that complicated. But the Elminster series is fantastic. Then, halfway now, in 5th place, we have Mistborn Era 1 by Mr. Brandon Sanderson. My copies are kind of tucked away, hidden on my shelf, and I'm too lazy to get them. But if you're on BookTube and you haven't heard somehow of Mistborn Era 1, I'm kind of shocked. I do have a spoiler-free review video of that first book, and I have spoiler-filled thoughts of books 2 and 3, so if you have read or are wanting to get into the Mistborn series, I'll point you in the direction of those videos. But basically, the setup for Mistborn Era 1, Book 1, The Final Empire, is we are seeing the world 1,000 years after the Dark Lord won. Ash rains from the sky, people are enslaved. It is a very bleak world with lots of mysteries going on in the background, and we kind of follow this secret uprising against this evil being known as the Lord Ruler. And each book in this trilogy feels very distinct in kind of the tropes / vibes of what the story is doing, but there is a very satisfying arc for all of our characters. It has one of the most unique endings in a fantasy book that I've read. It is just phenomenal. And it is also fundamental to people's understanding of the Cosmere. So if you're somebody who's wanting to dive into perhaps Stormlight Archive or any of his other Cosmere related works, the Mistborn Era 1 is not a bad place to start. It's one of the most frequently recommended places to check out Brandon Sanderson if you've never checked him out before. And I would highly recommend you read Mistborn Era 1. It is fantastic. Then in 4th place is the Avatar series. So this is another series set in the Forgotten Realms. And this is when I promised you that I would circle back to that thing called the Time of Troubles. So because Forgotten Realms is a Dungeons & Dragons campaign setting, sometimes Dungeons & Dragons or Wizards of the Coast who manages them will put out these big like world events. And so back when the Forgotten Realms books were being published in-house, those world events would also happen in the novels. So you would get this like really cool shaking up of the world that was across the video games, the tabletop, as well as the books. So the Time of Troubles basically happens because there is a pantheon of deities, and above them is Ao, who is kind of like the all-fathery type figure in the Forgotten Realms. And so somebody steals the Tablets of Fate, which basically are these magical records of every god and goddess and what they control and all of that kind of information, and they get stolen. So Ao kicks all of the gods and goddesses out of their heaven-like place onto Earth, and magic goes crazy. The gods are in these avatars. The Avatar series. And shenanigans ensue. There's huge upheavals of power. New gods and goddesses ascend. It's a wild time. So if you are somebody who really, like me, loves gods and goddesses and the gods walking among us and just wreaking all out havoc, then you should look no further than the Avatar series. It's by many different authors. It's just a fun series. I want to say it's 5 books. There's original trilogy and then a follow-up couple of books after that whole issue has been resolved. So if you like anything to do with gods and goddesses being super OP, being these avatar beings walking amongst us, trying to figure out what happened to reascend, the Avatar series. Then in 3rd place is a childhood nostalgia pick. So this is the Dragonlance Chronicles by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. This is book 1, Dragons of Autumn Twilight of the original trilogy. There are many books in the Dragonlance Chronicles. However, I would say that the first 6 books, so the first 2 trilogies, really kind of tell a cohesive story. And then there's a break where we get the 2nd generation where we meet the kids of some of our main characters. And then the subsequent books kind of we're following those kids of these main characters. So it's not a huge, gigantic investment of time. It's not as intimidating with as many entry points as something like the Forgotten Realms, because there's only really one entry point for the Dragonlance books, and that would be Dragons of Autumn Twilight. So in this book, we are following the War of the Lance. So basically there are these evil armies amassing known as Draconians, which are these like half dragon-like beings that follow the evil goddess Takhisis, and there are rumblings, something's going on, and so these friends who used to kind of adventure and band together have been off living their separate lives, doing their own things, and they come back and converge on this town that we see depicted on the cover of the first book, and they form a questing party to kind of go figure out what is happening. There's also a lot of fun of figuring out what have these people been up to when they've been off on their own, what's going on in the world, as we get embroiled in the events leading up to the War of the Lands. So if you like epic fantasy, you like chromatic dragons, very a la Dungeons and Dragons, where we have our blue dragon spitting lightning, our red dragon spitting fire, all of that kind of stuff, very classic mages that follow the 3 different moons. The good moon, which is the white moon, there's the red, like, neutral moon, and then there's the evil dark moon. And so if you like all of those classic, we have sorcerers, dwarves, half-elves, shamans, half draconian like beings, dragons, all of it. And one of my favorite brother relationships ever is in the Dragonlance Legends, which is the trilogy that follows the Dragonlance Chronicles, but they're also in the Chronicles, of course, as well. And so good. There's also going to be a read-along that I'm doing with Chris from A Fictional Escapist. I want to say it's in February of next year. Stay tuned on my community tab. I'll post all of the deets as it comes up, but we are doing a read-along of at least this first trilogy. So if you're somebody who's been interested in getting into it, there's still time for you. Then in second place, we have The War of the Spider Queen. This is just the dust jacket because my husband Alex is reading the book again because we both love this series. So this is book 1, Dissolution. There are 6 books in The War of the Spider Queen, and then there is a follow-up trilogy if you really want to know what happens next to one of the characters in particular. Again, this is more in the Forgotten Realms. This is a different place that you could start in the Forgotten Realms if you really want to, but this is my favorite series within that world. So if you really want to try the Forgotten Realms, give it a fair shake, and you don't know where to start, look no further than The War of the Spider Queen. So, in The War of the Spider Queen, we are following the Drow, which are the evil elves, and they live in this subterranean realm known as the Underdark, which is this connecting series of caverns. And in particular, this follows one of the leading cities in the Underdark known as Menzoberranzan. And in Drow society, we are following this matriarchal society because each of these kind of ruling families is led by a priestess of the spider demon goddess known as Lolth. And so what has happened is Lolth has mysteriously gone silent. So when the priestesses are praying to Lolth to get their divine magic, they are not able to reach her. And so what happens is a group of dark elves is set on a quest to find out what happened to Lolth. So they go on this journey to find a way into the Demon Web Pits, which is a layer of the abyss where Lolth holds dominion. And they're basically on this journey to find out what happened to Lolth. We follow our quest of characters, and since they are all dark elves, there are many kind of backstabbing, very self-interested shenanigans that happen. So if you're looking for just like goody two-shoes, this series will not give it to you. It's kind of a group of messed up evil individuals doing what they need to do, but also coming together for a common cause. There are demons, evil priestesses, wizards, there are liches, like everything that you could want from a Dungeons and Dragons type adventure is going to happen in the War of the Spider Queen. There are really cool twists that you're not going to see coming. So if you just want like a fun adventure fantasy with really vivid magic and world building, and if you want a world where magic isn't dead, it's very much at the forefront, used all the time, check out The War of the Spider Queen. It is so good. And then in first place, I know that everybody always says it's cliche when they pick this. I don't feel like it's cliche. My favorite completed fantasy series is The Lord of the Rings by the one, the only J.R.R. Tolkien. Oh. And this just sits so firmly in my nostalgia. So the first time I read The Lord of the Rings, I think it was just before the first movie was coming out. I think I was in 5th grade at the time, and it just blew me away. It sucked me into this world of magic and intrigue and just beautiful characters, beautiful relationships, like platonic relationships between characters, just going on this fantasy adventure. And the movies were such a formative part of me growing up. I remember I used to volunteer in this organization where we would rehabilitate abused horses. And so a lot of those movies I actually went to with my horseback riding instructor. She and I would go and see these movies together. And so it just was it very much just sticks out in my mind as a time and place that I just loved. And so The Lord of the Rings will forever be special to me. If you somehow don't know what The Lord of the Rings is, I'm concerned for you. It is this epic fantasy adventure quest to destroy this ring, because if we don't destroy the ring, it could bring about the reincarnation of the Dark Lord Sauron. And so we have an unlikely cast of characters, from these tiny defenseless hobbits all the way up to the wizard Gandalf, who band together on this quest to try to take the ring back to the one place that it can be destroyed to prevent the re-uprising of the Dark Lord. If you want rich world building, yes, sometimes he gets a little distracted. He'll describe a tree for far too long, but it's okay. The one complaint is, yes, the writing style is different from modern fantasy. It is not as easily digestible. It takes a little bit more effort, a little bit more thinking, and there are song breaks, poem interludes and stuff that just add to the rich lore and world building of this world. But you obviously, if they drive you nuts, you can skip them and not miss out on that much information. I know, people are gonna call me a fake fan. It's okay. But The Lord of the Rings, best fantasy series, most favorite, sticks in my nostalgia forever and ever. And so that concludes the list of my 10 favorite completed fantasy series that I have read all of to date. I hope as I go on that I can find more and more things that can maybe challenge the places of some of these on this list. If you have any recommendations that kind of are similar vibes to any of the books that I talked about here, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below. Or if you've read any of these series and want to chat about them, I'd also love to chat with you about them, either in the comments, or I have Discord, Instagram, and Twitter. All of the links are, of course, in the description down below. There's also a Amazon wishlist, which I have made because some people were asking. So if you would like to contribute to my content in that way by sending me a book, I would be forever grateful. But of course, there's absolutely no pressure. While you're down there, go ahead and hit the like button. Subscribe to this video if you have not already to see more bookish shenanigans like this from moi. Other than that, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye!